is vibrating.
And Lisa, do you know Isabella Nash? I'm sorry.
I don't know anybody. So.
Oh, that's right. And Tim, Isabel Nash, Lisa.
Isabel?
Lisa's been coming for
Nice to meet
a while.
No, I used to come on Tuesdays. Lisa.
Lisa.
And I ended up disappearing for a couple of years, which I didn't realize was as long as it was. And
was it really that long?
I think it was.
Wow.
And then I see Matt regularly, and he just goes, "Will you come to the retreat?" I think I should do that. And it was just nice to be back. Like the second I walked back in, it was like I never really left the Sangha. I go to the Dhamma dinners, and every time I drive past here, I think of the group. So what's nice now is that I have spent some time with the newer members. There's sometimes long-term, no long-timers were there, some new-timers, and now I get to meet you guys. So,
welcome to three-fourths of the Thursday Sangha.
Well, I'm psyched because Tuesdays I couldn't go. That's why I stopped. So when I heard there's Thursday, I'm gonna get my butt here.
I'm glad you made it.
I say that in the most right speech I could think of in the moment.
Did you? I don't know if you're the pictures are up. Most of the pictures are up from the retreat, and the talks are all up. And did you get the second email I sent on Monday just to the people that were on retreat? It had Larry's poem in it. Okay, good. So you got that. All right. Let's get started. So tonight's talk is one of my favorites, but I have about 84,000 favorites. It's a teaching where a nun teaches her ex-husband, both members of the Buddhist Sangha. One of the reasons why I like it is the teachings, to see how prominent women were in the Buddhist Sangha is really remarkable, thinking about how far back it was, 2,600 years ago. And the culture in the Buddhist time was kind of like India and really part of Tibet and Nepal today. That women were treated, you couldn't put women in any position of power. The Buddha did. So he was a good guy that way. We'll meditate first for 20 minutes. So find your relaxed meditative posture and gently close your eyes and gently close your mouths. And holding your back straight but not stiff. Your ears aligned with your shoulders and nose aligned with your navel. But holding yourself very loosely, very gently, very lovingly. Allow yourselves to settle into this room. Settle onto your seats. Settle into your bodies. And settle into your minds. And take a moment to become aware of the sensation of breathing in your body. Just get a feel for what that's like, to be mindful of your breath in your body. And while remaining mindful of your breath in your body, notice that thoughts are flowing. We're conscious beings, thoughts should be flowing. The purpose of meditation is to not be distracted by your own thoughts. So when you find that you're caught up in your thinking again, simply acknowledge that and return your mindfulness to the sensation of breathing. Relaxing your thoughts, remaining mindful of your breathing. And we'll meditate for 20 minutes with callbacks every 5 minutes. Relaxing thoughts, remaining mindful of your breathing. Relaxing thoughts, remaining mindful of your breathing. Relaxing thoughts, remaining mindful of your breathing. If a persistent thought or feeling arises, stay with it for a moment or two, recognize it as impermanent, and return your mindfulness to the sensation of breathing. And we'll meditate for 5 more minutes. Take a moment to notice the quality of your mind. Be at peace with your mind. And when you're ready, you can gently open your eyes. Welcome, Olivia. It's good to see you.
Hi, good to see you again.
And Emily, good to see you again. Why not? Olivia, Emily, Nash, Isabel, Tim, and Lisa in the back row. We had a pretty good introduction 2 weeks ago. I was going to say last week, but 2 weeks ago, another class last week. So the context for this sutta, I think, is somewhat established. This is a sutta where the nun Dhammadinna is teaching her ex-husband, both members of the Buddhist Sangha. His name is Visakha. An outline of the Dhamma very specific to clinging and craving. The second factor of the Eightfold, the second noble truth is that craving originates and clinging perpetuates suffering. Specific to I-making and the 5 clinging aggregates, and I'll explain a little bit more of that. But if you have any questions, or if you really start getting lost in this sutta, just let me know. So this sutta is a teaching presented by the nun Dhammadinna to her former husband, who was also a member of the Sangha. The Buddha praised Dhammadinna as one of the most knowledgeable nuns of the Sangha. And this is another example of the importance of women in the early monastic tradition of the Buddhist Sangha. The reason why I put that in here, there's a lot of misinformation that's used even today, 2,600 years later, to justify excluding women from either from actually joining the Sangha, taking vows as Buddhist nuns called bhikkhunis, or even if they're allowed into the Sangha. Most traditions, not everyone, will only allow women up to the level of novice. And the reason given is, well, the Buddha didn't want nuns in his Sangha. And it's just not true. They mischaracterize some of the words that the Buddha used about bringing nuns into the Sangha. The main reason why the Buddha did not want to have women in the early Sangha is because the culture in northern India and southern Nepal, which is similar to the way it is today, was such that by giving women any position of power, which a religious title would be, is he felt that they would be in danger, that they would be attacked, they might even be murdered, and that's really why he resisted. But it was because his stepmother and an aunt basically insisted that they wanted to become nuns, and the Buddha's cousin talked him to, and he says, "Well, that's fine. Let's see what happens." And over time, but very quickly, nuns became elevated to the status that other men had already attained in the Sangha. So the Buddha made no distinction between people, between classes, between anyone. Everybody was on an equal footing, and this is a good example, but there's many good examples of nuns taking on a teaching role. There's a section in the Digha Nikaya, the Pali Canon, called the Theragatha, which is all about teachings, nun teachers. And it's a beautiful section. Anyway, Visakha, the questioner, is also well established in the Dhamma. Visakha is seeking clarity. Visakha is Dhammadinna's husband. I left that line out. Visakha is seeking clarity on anatta, the not self-characteristic, and how anatta continually establishes itself through clinging in all phenomena. Visakha asked his ex-wife, Dhammadinna, what is self-identification as described by the Buddha? Visakha, the Buddha teaches that self-identification is established by clinging to form, by clinging to feeling, by clinging to perceptions, by clinging to fabrications, and by clinging to consciousness. These 5 clinging aggregates are the self-identification taught by the Buddha. I don't know if I touched on the 5 clinging aggregates 2 weeks ago. The 5 clinging aggregates are form, physical form, feelings, we all have feelings, perceptions arising from those feelings, fabrications, which are assumptions we make about ourselves in relation to the world that are rooted in ignorance of 4 noble truths, form, feeling, perceptions, mental fabrications, and consciousness, meaning an ongoing thinking rooted in that ignorance. And that simply describes the personal experience of ongoing confusion, deluded thinking, and suffering. Because the words are familiar, especially used in that way, we have a hard time understanding that. But just remember that the 5 clinging aggregates are the personal experience of suffering. Lost my place. That's where I lost my place. Anatta seeks, these are my words, anatta seeks to continually establish itself in every form, feeling, perception, mental fabrication, indeed in every thought. Misunderstanding anatta to mean no self and to minimize the importance of understanding anatta by misapplying emptiness to anatta negates the Buddhist teachings. And I won't get into this whole explanation, but a lot of the later developed schools have used the idea of emptiness, meaning everything is empty of any type of self, is simply an adaptation to the Buddhist teaching. The Buddha used the term emptiness to refer to empty yourself of ignorance, which is really what his whole teaching on. It's not some magical or mystical realm that we aspire to, which is how it's often presented. In this sutta, anatta is presented in a clear and direct way as a central understanding to be developed. Visakha continues, your answer is very helpful. What then is the origination of self-identification to form, feeling, perceptions, fabrications, indeed, in every thought? It is craving, Visakha, that brings continual establishment of anatta, craving born of clinging, accompanied by passion and by delight. Craving for sensual pleasure, craving for continued establishment in this world and other realms. And now, Dhammadinna is not giving credence to other realms. He's just saying that the mystical teachings of the time and even currently are used to house a self once it has left the physical realm. And again, this is something that the Buddha never taught, except in the context that it was used during the Buddhist time and still today. So a good example of that would be in many of the modern Buddhist schools, especially the Tibetan, but even the Zen schools, seek to establish the not self in higher realms of consciousness. And actually, there's visualizations to actually do that. I mean, the Buddhist practice is about establishing yourself in other realms. And again, it's the Buddha teaches that what is considered a self, if it's rooted in ignorance, is a wrong view. Let go of the views. And then ultimately, we understand that the self is not something that is annihilated by developing understanding, but the self is simply in a constant process of becoming. So at no point in time can you say there's a fixed self. Because when we start doing that, we're creating assumptions about ourselves. If we let go of the need to continually establish a permanent self, then we can accept that we're always in a process of becoming, and great peace and great gentleness comes into our lives, and also great meaning. It's the only way that we can truly be present in our life as our life unfolds, to let go of the notion of establishing a permanent self and realize that we're always in a constant process of becoming. Because when we can finally grasp that, then each and every moment has deep meaning and purpose, because we're aware that we're contributing to our own mindfulness and well-being moment by moment as life occurs. We're no longer trying to continue to establish a self rooted in wrong view. Another way of saying that is that we are opening ourselves to the possibility of each moment. Is that somewhat clear to everyone? Good, it's important. Oh, my eyes are tired. I'm going to skip a paragraph or two. This is on the website and linked in email. So Visakha asks, what then is a cessation of self-identification? The renunciation and remainderless fading away of the very craving born of clinging that originates the continual establishment of anatta. This is the cessation of self-identification as taught by the Buddha. What then, dear lady, is the path or the practice leading to the cessation of self-identification that is taught by the Buddha? Friend Visakha, it is precisely the noble eightfold path of right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right meditation that the Buddha teaches to develop the virtue, the concentration, and the wisdom required to abandon self-identification and to abandon clinging. So another teaching where the importance of developing the Eightfold Path is pointed to repeatedly about as the path to develop liberation. Lisa was on retreat this past weekend, and how many times did me, but meaning me reading the Buddhist teachings, refer back to the Eightfold Path? And it's kind of hard to understand how over the years, on one hand, it's hard to understand, on the other hand, it's not. In many of the Buddhist schools, even if the Eightfold Path is mentioned, which most of them don't, it's mentioned as almost as a preliminary practice that really isn't all that important, when it's the only path that the Buddha taught to recognize and abandon wrong views rooted in ignorance. And that's the main reason, it's the only reason the Buddha taught that path. Because if you think about how an ignorant mind creates strategies to continue to ignore its own ignorance, and that's characterized as a deluded mind. How would a deluded mind know that it's deluded unless it had some frame of reference to recognize it? And that's precisely why the Buddha taught an eightfold path. And a necessary component of continuing delusion is continued ignorance and a continued scattered mind, a mind that cannot see things as they are occurring. Another word for saying that is a mind that is not well concentrated. So that eighth factor of the eightfold path, concentration, what we're using meditation for, is so important to support the refined mindfulness of the other seven factors, to recognize and abandon ignorant views. Visakha asks, is clinging the same as the five clinging aggregates? This is an interesting answer. Clinging is not the same as five clinging aggregates, Visakha, nor is it separate. It is the nature of five clinging aggregates to cling. It is the function of the five clinging aggregates to cling. It is the nature of anatta to cling. It is the function of anatta to cling. Notice the slight differentiation between the underlying action and the ignorance there. That once we're stuck in ignorant views that are causing us to create a wrong identification by clinging these different aggregates together, it's simply its nature to continue. And the reason why that's important, one of the reasons why I say we need to be very gentle with ourselves as we're developing this, is because once we're stuck in it, once we're stuck in it, wait for the answer. Once we're stuck in it, aren't we? Again, pointing back to the eightfold path. How else would we get out of it? It's the nature of ignorance to ignore what is really most obvious. It's the nature of clinging to these views to continue clinging. So something has to occur to interrupt that. Visakha asks another important question. So how does self-identification develop? Those uninstructed in regard to the Dhamma, meaning those uninstructed in the Four Noble Truths, run-of-the-mill people with no regard for noble ones or those of integrity, are deluded. They believe that form to be the self or the self to possess the form. I own this. This is me. It's all I'm ever going to be. They are further deluded to believe that their self-referential feelings are the self. And how often do most people spend their whole life defending their feelings and often blaming other people for their feelings, when feelings are simply something that is arising out of ignorance. And when you really understand that, you stop taking everything so, excuse the word, damn seriously, because they're like foam on the ocean. There's nothing there. We give our feelings all the power that they seem to have, but how many of us think that our feelings rule our lives, don't they?
Sean,
Yes.
can I interrupt you?
Please.
In that light, the importance of that is because we're trying to fulfill and satisfy our ego, yes?
Yes. Yes. So another word for dukkha is unsatisfying, isn't it? And that becomes the preoccupation with dukkha, or the preoccupation to always keep ourselves satisfied when we can't because of impermanence, or to avoid anything that might impact on my satisfaction in this moment. And do you see how we get caught up in this monkey mind of always chasing after what makes me feel good and always being concerned about something that might take away from that? Because I've established myself as something permanent. And you could do it with you could recognize it even with just one feeling. I've had a feeling now, I want to keep having this feeling. And so we think that the purpose of life is to always maintain whatever we define as happy or safe or secure, whatever that might be. When the truth of the matter is everything is impermanent. So what makes me feel happy or safe and secure or fulfilled in this moment is going to change, because whatever it is, at some point is going to vanish. Or our focus, something else will come in, and I'll decide, wow, I really like cheesecake better than chocolate cake. What a fool I was for liking chocolate cake. Now I'm in a cheesecake. And the next piece of cake, or the next relationship, or the next sport, the next exercise, the next TV show, the next teacher. And we just get into this constant cycle of chasing after anything that will prove to be a distraction from an unsatisfactory experience. And so we cling to things that it's foolish to even cling to or to create identities by. Thank you for the question. I'm going to go back one sentence. They are further deluded to believe that their self-referential feelings are the self, that their perceptions of self defines the self, that their fabrications that further establish the self to be the self. Remember, all of these strategies are rooted in ignorance. They assume that their self-referential thoughts establish the self. There's that. There's a famous saying, and I can't remember the philosopher. I think, therefore I am. I can't pronounce it. I remember it's Descartes, I think, but that's not the right pronunciation. He was a very famous philosopher that was trying to come up with a irrefutable statement about who he is. And he finally came up with, because I think, a self-referential thought, then I must be. And how can you refute that? Well, the Buddha refuted it, didn't he? Saying that when your thinking is rooted in ignorance, what are you establishing? A self rooted in ignorance. So if you continue to insist that what I'm thinking defines me, and that thinking is rooted in ignorance, you can only have unsatisfactory experiences and get caught in this feedback loop of who you think you are, bouncing back on an ongoing thought process that is rooted in ignorance. Is that clear? That's a little bit of a difficult concept to understand in one sitting. We developed it over retreat, but they gave us, we had 3.5 days to do that. But the sutta where the Buddha describes his awakening is called the Nagara Sutta. And in that sutta, he describes being stuck in this feedback loop of self-referential views bouncing off of thinking rooted in ignorance. And it's such an important sutta. It should be something that's taught in kindergarten, because it describes what happens to us when we're stuck in our self-referential views and we don't have a perspective in which to recognize that we are. They assume that their self-referential thoughts establish the self. Each of these 5 clinging aggregates are impermanent and arise from ignorance. They are anatta, meaning they are not self. The views themselves are not self. So how does self-identification not develop? There's the important question, isn't it? Those well instructed in regard to the Dhamma, with regard for the noble ones, and those with integrity, well disciplined in their practice, do not believe the form to be the self. In other words, there's no self-identification with this being a permanent self. They do not believe that feelings establish or define a self. Feelings come and go. They're just as like foam on the ocean. There's no substance to it except in the moment as a feeling is arising. If there's no self-reference to that feeling, if there's no judgment, I like it, I don't like it, or I'm ambivalent to it, which is really how most of our feelings develop. If there's no self-judgment about the feeling, then the feeling is appropriate. In other words, when we might feel sadness, we just learned a loved one dies, it's entirely appropriate to feel sadness in that moment. It's not appropriate to start judging the situation, or I don't want to feel this, or how could that person do that, or how could God take that person away from me, or any other feeling. Even a feeling such a strong feeling like anger, in the moment, it may be an appropriate feeling as long as we don't take it somewhere and react to it, meaning blame another person, blame ourselves, or use that feeling to create violence in the world. The same thing with a happy or an elated feeling. Something wonderful happens, or we kiss a baby, or we see a beautiful sunset. It makes us feel good. And in that moment, it's an appropriate feeling. It's when we start hanging on to the feeling, attaching ourselves, or saying, I need this feeling to continue to be happy, that we're creating self-referential views. Lisa.
Yeah, Donna, you're talking about that. I mean, it's so true. Like, what I'm hearing in my head is a reminder from you is not to follow a thought with a thought.
Yes.
So it's the same thing when feeling arises. It's not even to follow the feeling with a thought. It's just to be with the feeling and then let it pass by, no different than we do in meditation.
Yeah.
You know, things like sadness sometimes can stay longer because of the grief of missing something.
Yep.
But it's still because of following a thought with a thought. So for me, what I found is that's when I try to pop into meditation as often as I can. Like even 2 minutes in my car, like if I feel something's rising for me, a lot of times it's just sitting silently, and that allows me to come back to the reminder of breathing.
Yes.
And how important it is for me to just kind of refocus back on that, no matter what the feeling is. So.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Meditation is one of the real benefits of deepening concentration. When we use the method, we find out that we're caught up, or find that we're caught up in our thoughts again and come back to the sensation of breathing. We're interrupting that process of clinging to thoughts or following one thought with another thought. And so as Lisa just described, during the day when we're caught up in something, and we use the training we developed on our cushions to simply come back to our breath for a moment or two, we're interrupting that process too. And we're allowing ourselves to be present with our life as life occurs. And notice I didn't say we're joining with the present moment, because there's no such thing as a present moment. Everything is in a constant process of becoming. And the more well concentrated our minds are, the more we are present with our own life as our life occurs, without any resistance. And so whatever occurs, whatever feeling we have, whatever thought we have in the moment, if it's not framed by a judgment, it's an appropriate thought. Years ago, I had a teacher who was, he was pretty close to he had a pretty good understanding of the Buddhist teaching, even though he didn't present it that way. And some of his ideas were had a little bit of eye-making. But he had a great description of what happens, how we create an emotion or a reaction. We attach a thought to a feeling, and really meaning a judgmental thought to a feeling. I like it, I don't like it, rather than simply being present with life as life occurs, which is really what the Buddha taught, that type of refined mindfulness. They do not assume that thoughts establish a self, or that the self possesses thoughts. It's an interesting line. The Buddha often talks about we join with our suffering, we join with our thoughts, meaning, it's an extreme example of clinging. We think that we possess ours. We define ourselves by thoughts and feelings. They do not assume that consciousness is the self, or that the self possesses consciousness. And when we get to that point, we realize that our thinking process, when it's rooted in the reality of the Four Noble Truths, is simply a tool for reference to what is occurring. Is that somewhat clear? In other words, it's not happening to me as a fixed self. I've lost the self-identification, and now I'm not taking anything personal. But what's left is this brilliant mind that can see things clearly and be present with it. That's true freedom. That's enlightenment. That's an awakened, fully mature human being. Your thoughts are simply a true reflection of life as life unfolds, without any me in it. When the Buddha describes that process, it's recognizing things that the Bahia Sutta is a great sutta on that, of recognizing that this is not me, this is not mine, this is not who I am, this is not myself. What does that mean to an awakened human being? It simply means you're not taking anything personal. And I can tell you that when that occurs, the most seemingly meaningless things in life, things that you wouldn't even notice, because of the ambivalence to most things that don't get a rise out of us, the most meaningless, I shouldn't even put that word, the most seemingly insignificant things have great meaning and purpose. Why? Because it's what's occurring. I don't need anything to be any different. You got that? Isn't that wonderful though? I mean, that's what the Buddha's teaching. There is no self, Dhammadinna is continuing. There is no self attached to any of these 5 clinging aggregates. Again, I'm going to skip around a little bit, just leaving my own comments out because I'm adding them. Visakha then asks if the Eightfold Path is fabricated or unfabricated. Such an important question. And Dhammadinna replies that the Eightfold Path is fabricated in the sense that it's developed so that we can address ignorance, and so that it has to be it has to be applicable to where we're at, or it's a useless teaching. This gentleman that I mentioned before about thoughts attached to feelings or emotions, his name was Arnold Patton. He used to describe this in a great way. Lisa's heard this before, that if you're in New York and you want to get to Chicago, but you think you're in Los Angeles, you're not going anywhere. You have to know where you are. You have to deal with who you are at the level that you are, at the level of consciousness, with the type of thinking that you have, and that's what the Eightfold Path is for. So it's fabricated. It meets us at any point that we enter into the Eightfold Path as a framework for our life. It's appropriate and it will work. We don't have to have some type of advanced knowledge. We don't have to be anything special. The Eightfold Path is a path the Buddha taught for every single human being who engages with it to develop awakening, and rather quickly too. In other words, it doesn't take lifetimes and lifetimes like it's often portrayed. The Buddha taught an Eightfold Path for human beings to develop in this lifetime, in life as life occurs. And the timing is different for everyone, but everyone who takes wholeheartedly with the Eightfold Path is assured of awakening, more than likely in this lifetime. Notice I'm not guaranteeing in this lifetime, but give it a good shot and you likely will. These are my words now. The Eightfold Path is fabricated, arising from foreign feelings and perceptions, as it is a teaching developed within the sphere of impermanent phenomenal world. It's part of impermanence. The intention of the Eightfold Path is that it brings understanding to those under the delusion that their belief in self requires clinging to what is in reality anicca or impermanent. The Eightfold Path is a path of skillful means to developing the unfabricated quality of mind of release from clinging. During the retreat, we went through the Buddha's very first 3 discourses called the Cardinal Discourse. The first discourse is on the Four Noble Truths. And when you look at the Four Noble Truths from a certain perspective, it's seen as a teaching on impermanence. It teaches that we might be stuck in our views in the moment, but by developing the Eightfold Path, even those views are impermanent. And the next 2 discourses speak to anatta, the not self characteristic, and dukkha, that results from misunderstanding the interaction between a not self characteristic and impermanence. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. Vipassana then inquires if the qualities of virtue, concentration, and wisdom are developed through the Eightfold Path, or do those qualities inspire the Eightfold Path? Vipassana, the Eightfold Path, is inspired by the qualities of virtue, concentration, and wisdom. Right speech, right action, and right livelihood inspire the development of heightened virtue. Right effort, right mindfulness, and right meditation inspire the development of heightened concentration, and right view and right intention inspire and develop heightened wisdom. My words, the Buddha consistently characterized the Eightfold Path as a path combining the 3 qualities of wisdom, virtue, and concentration, and that all 3 characteristics are necessary for awakening to occur. Overemphasizing one quality over the other 2 would not develop a fully integrated or fully awakened human being. This is an important understanding, as much of modern Buddhism will focus mostly on compassionate engagement, the Bodhisattva path, or scholarly study, which is a subset of some other paths, even the Zen path and even some of the Tibetan path, and even the Theravadan path, some of them overemphasize just scriptural study, or mind-only practice of primarily meditation with little or no engagement with the Four Noble Truths. And the Zen, or the Son, meaning Korean Zen, or Chinese Zen is called Chan, C-H-A-N, or Chan. Most of those are from the mind-only, or they call the Yogacara school, which their primary focus is just on meditation. And if you meditate long and hard enough with enough intensity, eventually your Buddha nature will arise. And the Buddha never taught anything like that. He taught meditation as one factor. You can't overemphasize it. This sutta brings to mind the actual path that the Buddha taught as the path to awakening. Modern applications of mindfulness alters the intention of right mindfulness and right meditation, meaning Shamatha-Vipassana meditation, by dismissing through omission the framework of the Eightfold Path for a conceptual application of mindfulness meditation. So the Buddha taught mindfulness in very specific ways. And that's not to say that general mindfulness, meaning being mindful of what's occurring in your life, it's a good thing to develop. But as far as the Dhamma practice is concerned, the Buddha taught mindfulness in very specific ways. First, in the 4 foundations of mindfulness. Excuse me. And then within the 4 foundations of mindfulness, specifically to be mindful of each factor of the Eightfold Path, and that requires concentration. The Shamatha-Vipassana Sutta, which means the 4 foundations of mindfulness, is something we went through here over 7 weeks, and there's a series of those 7 talks on the website too. One of the most important suttas. Visakha asks, excuse me, what is concentration and what is the framework for right concentration? And what are the requisites and how is it developed? Samadhi, meaning non-distraction, is concentration. Samadhi is just a Pali word that means that, non-distraction or concentration. The framework for right concentration is the 4 foundations of mindfulness. And initially, the 4 foundations are taught this way: being mindful of the breath in the body, which is just what we do in our meditation. Being mindful of feelings arising and fading away, which is what we do when we recognize that we're caught up in our thinking, and it's usually a feeling that drives that distraction. We come back to the sensation of breathing. We're recognizing the arising and the passing away of feelings. Being mindful of thoughts occurring and fading away, the same thing. As our concentration deepens, we recognize how impermanent each and every thought is. They arise and they pass away. Even persistent thought, that's that last instruction that I give, relates to the 4th foundation of mindfulness that I'll read in a minute. Even persistent thoughts or feelings that seem to be nagging at us, or at least using the more gentler word, persistent, will arise and pass away. And if we're stuck in a persistent thought, the best thing to do during meditation, and relates to the 4th foundation of mindfulness, is simply recognize this is a persistent thought or feeling. Come back to the sensation of breathing. And it might pop up in the next thought. Come back to the sensation of breathing. Because it's just something that's arising out of conditioned mind, which itself is rooted in ignorance, which itself is rooting in nothing. Being mindful of thoughts occurring and fading away, and being mindful of the present quality of mind. That's the last instruction that I give when we're coming out of meditation. Notice the quality of your mind. Be at peace with the quality of your mind. Meaning, even coming out of meditation, we might find that we have an agitated mind state. That's fine. Meditation served its purpose to deepen concentration. Notice it and be at peace with it. And what we're teaching ourselves then is to be at peace with less than peaceful mind states. And at first that might sound crazy. Isn't the problem that I'm not at peace with my mind? No, the problem is that you're insisting that your mind be something different in the present moment as your life unfolds. Be at peace with less than peaceful mind state. That's the 4th foundation of mindfulness. The 6th factor of the Eightfold Path, this is Dhammadinna. Right effort provides the requisite for right concentration. I mean, you actually have to put some time in on your meditation cushion and develop the other factors of the Eightfold Path. You should always endeavor with skillful desire and persistence for the non-arising of unskillful qualities, and to abandon unskillful qualities that have yet arisen. It simply means to recognize what I'm thinking or how I'm acting that is not in accordance with the Eightfold Path. If it's unskillful, simply recognize it and abandon it. We don't have to analyze, we don't have to figure it out, we don't have to blame ourselves, certainly, or blame other people or situations. Simply recognize that there's a disturbance in your mind. And it really is that simple when we start diminishing clinging. And Visakha, always endeavor with great desire and persistence to generate skillful qualities that have yet arisen. Meaning, how do we develop skillful qualities? We recognize right speech, right action, and right livelihood. And we emphasize it when we recognize that we're engaged in right speech, we're with a friend who's gossiping about another friend, someone who's not there. We recognize it. It doesn't mean we have to say anything and put the other person down. We simply don't engage in gossip or in idle chatter or when we're in being mindful of right action. We don't do things that are contrary to right action. And the best way to recognize that is right action, right speech, right livelihood are all aspects of selflessness and always being helpful, or at least not hurtful to other people and ourselves. And again, as we develop the Eightfold Path, those virtuous factors become integrated as part of our life, and it becomes a natural aspect of our mindfulness to recognize when we're caught in the unskillful or the wrong side of that, and we simply come back into the right factors or the skillful factors. When the Buddha taught mindfulness, he taught it just that way: to be mindful when you're in wrong view and enter and remain in right view; to be mindful when you're in wrong intention and enter and remain in right intention; to hold these qualities in mind; to be mindful when you're in wrong speech or engaging in wrong speech, and enter and remain in right speech. And the parameters for those are very simple. We know them. Another aspect of right speech, and it's also right action and right livelihood, is what are we telling ourselves? In fact, that's even the most important aspect. The story we have going on in our head. Am I sabotaging myself? Am I beating myself up? Are my thoughts somewhat self-loathing? Recognize it. Don't do anything with it. Don't try to figure out where it came from. You know, your mom looked at you backwards when you were 3 years. It has nothing to do with that. And the reason why that's not important is what's occurring right now. What's occurring right now is taking place in your own thinking. And it's at that point that we recognize it that we can simply abandon it. We don't have to do anything else with it. And there's such peace and power in recognizing that we're finally gaining the ability to think what we want to think when we want to think it. And each and every one of us has that ability once we develop the concentration and the other 7 factors of the Eightfold Path. I better stop. I want to get through this sutta today. I got to go back that one sentence again just to keep it in perspective, in context. And Visakha always endeavor with great desire and persistence to generate skillful qualities that have yet arisen and to maintain skillful qualities that have arisen. Be mindful that you're actually developing and integrating the Eightfold Path. One of the things that's so important and powerful about being a part of our group, and it certainly comes up on retreat too, is hearing each other in describing how they're developing the Dhamma. And as we're talking about it as individuals, we're supporting each other by describing how we're integrating the Eightfold Path. It just supports everyone. Visakha asks, what are fabrications, dear lady? There are 3: bodily fabrications, verbal fabrications, and mental fabrications. In and out breaths are bodily fabrications as breaths are generated from the clinging aggregate of form. Feelings and perceptions are mental fabrications as they are generated by the clinging aggregates of feeling and perceptions. Conditioned and discursive thought and evaluation are verbal fabrications as they are generated from the clinging aggregate of consciousness. So that probably right now sounds like a little gobbledygook. It just means that when we're rooted in ignorance, until we start developing the framework of the Eightfold Path, we really can't trust what we're feeling, especially if it's causing a reactive mind, an unsettled feeling. We know that it's rooted in fabrications, which are themselves rooted in ignorance. Simply recognize it and come back to the sensation of breathing. If it's on our cushion, simply recognize it and be mindful of the other factors of the Eightfold Path if it's off our cushion. How does the attainment of cessation of feelings and perceptions develop? Dhammadinna continues, a well-informed person who has developed understanding through the Eightfold Path does not have a thought of attainment. Rather, their refined mind leads to the cessation of feelings and perceptions. Verbal fabrications cease, then bodily fabrications, and finally mental fabrications. My words. This process directly relates to right speech and verbal fabrications, right action and bodily fabrications, and the 3 concentration factors and the cessation of mental fabrications. Of course, the entire Eightfold Path is a mutually supportive practice of developing cessation of all of these fabrications. Mindfulness of right speech is often the initial insight into clinging conditioned mind, and gained when developing understanding through engagement with the Eightfold Path. Dhammadinna continues, when a well-informed person emerges from the cessation of feelings and perceptions, they are empty of clinging, free of self-identification and conditioned mind. The well-informed person's mind inclines to seclusion and away from delight and entanglement with the world. This often comes up just as a comment. As we start developing the Eightfold Path, many people find that the allure or their own entanglement with the world starts diminishing. And that can at first be a little unsettling, because for most of our lives, since the minute we were born, we have been entangled with the world. And so when we first start withdrawing a little bit, now I'm not talking about leaving the world and going in a cave, although you might. It simply means that you're diminishing your entanglement, you're clinging to the world. And your life will start slowing down a little bit. You'll realize that you don't need that constant engagement with the world. You don't need to always have your cell phone to your ear, be on Facebook or Twitter, or all the other things. And that's usually a pretty gradual process, and it's important just to recognize it. And so it's not necessary to completely cut the world off if you want to develop the Dhamma. But little by little, notice your engagement and recognize if that engagement is leading to continued eye-making or if it's leading to a calm and peaceful mind. And that's the potential that each moment holds. And that's developed through mindfulness. The Buddha describes, my words, the Buddha describes an awakened human being very simply as unbound from clinging, and the quality of mind of an awakened human being is calm. This may seem rather simplistic and mundane, but when seen within the context of Four Noble Truths, it is clearly seen that the endless cycle of wandering through samsara, wandering a life rooted in ignorance, anatta, subject to continuous confusion and disappointment, has been brought to cessation. The remainder of human life can be lived in lasting peace and happiness. Visakha asks, how many kinds of feelings are there? There are only three types of feelings, Visakha. There is a pleasant feeling, a painful feeling, and a neutral feeling. We think that our feelings are so complicated, and they lead us endlessly down this loop of self-referential views. There's only three. Pleasant feeling that changes becomes painful, doesn't it? If we're clinging to it. Painful feelings that change become pleasant. Do you see how the feedback loop is established and maintained? Neutral feelings may change as well to either pleasure or pain. All things are subject to impermanence. Pleasant feelings can give rise to passion, obsession. Painful feelings can give rise to resistance, obsession. We simply want more of whatever it is, or we want less of anything. Neutral feelings can give rise to ignorance, obsessions. And that's when I say most of us, the hardest thing to recognize is the ambivalence that we have towards life. And that's an aspect of ignorance. If you look at the word ignorance, what does ignorance mean? It means to ignore something. And in this case, we're ignoring what's occurring in our own life. We miss most of our life because of that. And the rest of our life gives rise to something, either desire or aversion. When a well-informed person is withdrawn from the obsession of sensual fulfillment and withdrawn from unskillful qualities, through meditative absorption, they abandon passion and passion obsession. Yearning for final liberation, resistance obsession is also abandoned. Deepening meditation, meditative absorption, ignorance obsession is abandoned. Visakha asks, dear lady, this is important. Dear lady, what then lies on the other side of ignorance? Visakha is asking, what is beyond awakening? He still wants more. He's still looking for, how can I establish myself when I've let go of all ignorant views? Dhammadinna answers, clear knowing, meaning true insight, lies on the other side of ignorance. And Visakha, with clear knowing, comes release from clinging to ignorant views. From release from clinging comes complete unbinding. I'm leaving out a little bit here. Visakha, despite his understanding, continues to cling to the need to establish himself after awakening. And he asks, Dhammadinna, what then lies on the other side of unbinding? Visakha, your clinging mind has demanded too many answers, and your question will lead to only more confusion and suffering. And this is often what happens. A common question is, when people start getting the understanding of the Dhamma, is what happens to me after I awaken? Because the implication feels like annihilation, but you're simply letting go of views rooted in ignorance. There's nothing of value, nothing of any importance that is gone. Dhammadinna continues, the Buddhist path, the Eightfold Path, culminates in unbinding. Is this not enough? If you wish, go to the Buddha and ask him. Let his answer be enough. So Visakha was delighted in Dhammadinna's teachings, but, well, let me read. He bowed to her and left for the Buddha. He's got to check. Finding the Buddha nearby, he sat to one side of the Buddha and recounted what Dhammadinna told him. The Buddha replied, Dhammadinna is very wise and of great discernment. I would have answered your questions exactly as she has. This is how you should remember these teachings. Visakha was pleased by the Buddha's confirmation. That's the end of the sutta. I have a little bit more comments on that, but so if you see where Dhammadinna took Visakha through the entire Dhamma, and he understood it, but yet he still had that answer. What happens to me after I awaken? He still has this self-referential need to establish himself somewhere, rather than simply accept the fact that it's his views, rooted in ignorance, that are causing all the confusion, deluded thinking, and disappointing experiences in his life. Recognize and abandon wrong views. So that's the talk for tonight. Thank you. Sorry about that, new phone. Any questions directly related to this sutta, and we'll just go around the room. Yes, Nash?
It's not so much a question, just like a thought about the sutta was kind of dissipation of anatta was one of the like early kind of bigger concepts and bigger in like more than being able to understand it at like kind of like karma, like more than just like being able to understand it upon hearing it once.
Yeah.
You kind of need to chew on it and think about it. And this was a great kind of like explanation of that. And I kind of hope, I forget his name, but that character.
Visakha?
Yeah, I kind of appreciated all of his questions. And
oh, yeah.
It was a nice kind of like reintroduction after being gone to kind of literally be ran through almost the whole of the Dhamma. Like, she went through the 5 clean aggregates and like went through the Eightfold Path in sort of detail.
Yeah.
And it was nice to just kind of have all that. And like the questions he asks are questions that probably, I mean, I would guess, most people that do this have, as they learn about things, and they're certainly almost every question he asked, I would have had. It presented,
Now, notice that Visakha was a member of the Sangha. He already had an understanding of the Dhamma. Mm-hmm. And that's why he could ask such skillful questions. That's one of the reasons I go around the room is because I want to hear your questions, because it's your questions that tell me whether you're understanding it or not. And most of you are. They're skillful questions, and they relate directly to understanding the Dhamma. And I can tell by your comments too that you're developing an understanding because you see the importance of this. The insight that we gain through the Buddhist teachings is into the 3 marks of existence, and it's the only useful insight that's developed. The reason why I say that is there's one of the largest Buddhist movements is called insight meditation. I'm not putting it down, but that's taught in a way to gain insight into everything that's occurring, which can get pretty distracting. The Buddha taught 3 marks of existence are the problem. The impermanence of all things, the not self-characteristic, and the interaction between those two rooted in a misunderstanding that results in suffering. So as we gain an understanding of the impermanence of all things, including trying to establish a permanent self, anatta, we recognize that that's the underlying cause for distraction and unsatisfactory experiences. It takes a while to see it, but you're getting there. That really is the underlying teaching. Well, okay, I'll leave it at that before I go on any further. So, do you have any other questions or comments about tonight's? And then we'll go to...
Probably, but I can't think of one at this moment. So,
well, you can always send me an email too if something comes up. I'm glad you made it tonight. It's good to have you back.
You too, John.
Isabella, good to see you.
Good to see you. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for asking.
This was a delightful sutta. Very much needed. I've been, I guess, it reflected my day. It was where I don't know, very stressful day, a lot of just wanting things to be different than they were, and it was causing a lot of suffering, and this was just exactly what I needed to bring me to just being, and not even just the present, because I don't know, that like stuck with me that there is no present, like it's constantly becoming and unfolding, and that is very peaceful.
Isn't
That
it?
makes me feel at peace.
Yeah.
Especially with this day I had, so thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And it should work that way, that you recognize the Dhamma and it brings peace. That's how it's designed. And you notice too that wanting your day to be different than it was increased your stress, didn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's such a profound understanding.
And it's when I don't know, I get stuck in this loop because I have all these things happening and I feel that way that I want, and then I go back, and then I realize that that's how I'm reacting to it and how it's causing suffering, and I have that moment of peace, but then it kind of comes back up again, like, and then I get stuck in that loop again, and it's kind of, can be a little bit frustrating because of having the knowledge, but at the same time feeling like I don't have like the control, I don't know, or the concentration, I guess.
That's the point where you need to be gentle with yourself.
Yeah.
And it's easy to say, but that frustration will come up. At any point in the chain of reactions, recognize it, come back to what's occurring, take a breath, and eventually the reactions will diminish. So you could look at almost like reactions add up.
Mm-hmm.
One reaction leads to another, leads to another, leads to 15 reactions. So you're way removed from the initial reaction. You're in some other place now that really doesn't even have a relationship to the original thing, but you're here. That's another way for saying that is you're now mindless. I don't mean just you, everybody does this. So as you develop the Dhamma, you might pick up that mindlessness at step 7 rather than step 15. At any point that you pick it up and just develop a calm and peaceful mind in the moment, you're diminishing your conditioned thinking that causes it in the first place. And so it's in that way, you're training your mind to not go as far as it goes. And the recognition that it's my reaction, my wanting something to be different than it is the essence of the Dhamma, because a peaceful mind accepts whatever's occurring. Things that would normally lead to a bad day are simply part of life. The Buddha describes the first noble truth as dukkha occurs. It happens all the time. When we stop taking things personal, we don't react to the common occurrences of unsatisfactory occurrences in life.
Yeah, in the past few weeks, I think I have really come to that understanding of dukkha occurs, whereas I knew it because I was being told, but like it's part of my it's part of my being. It's part of my everyday. I don't know. And there was this sense of like release or relief with that.
That's exactly
it just is.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I had a conversation with my mom, and she was going through all this stuff with my aunt, and she just kept she just kept questioning it and why, and I was like, because that's a part of this experience.
Yeah, it's what's occurring.
It's just, and it's okay to be okay with that. Like it just is.
Yeah, other people are part of that unsatisfactory experience. They just are. Your mom's got to get back to class.
Yes.
Thank you for all that. You're really, I mean, you're showing that you're developing the Dhamma just how it should be. Thank you. Tim, good to see you.
Good to see you. Good to see everybody. Great Sutta. I mean, it could be almost spread over a week.
Yeah.
There's so much in there. One thing I'm noticing with my meditation is, as my concentration is getting better, I am picking up when situations are beginning. Now, the goal, or hope, is that I can won't get to that situation in response, whether it be somebody cutting you off in traffic and then you getting up, having that blood boil for a second, or somebody cutting in front of you being rude, or a client doing something, whatever it may be. The concentration level is allowing me to recognize those things. One thing I've noticed, though, is, and this has to do with ego, is that there is a feeling of feeling bad afterwards that I felt, that I reacted.
Mm-hmm.
And I recognize that too. And then that's where I think, John, was when you say be gentle with yourself. When you recognize that you're getting caught up in reaction, to be gentle with yourself and reset, recognize it and move on, and almost chalk it up as a learning experience. And this is wonderful. It's and you're right. I do find life slowing down, with not being so enthralled with all the distractions around, whether it be the news, the Facebook, or even when people start talking, gossiping. I'm like disinterested.
Yeah.
Not being rude, but doesn't really. It's not meaningful. And so when the sutta when you were talking about the sutta and the questions being asked, there's certain questions that I was thinking about. And one thing that I found with when you talk about emotions is the word ego kept coming back to me, desire. And when you think about emotions, when you think of these hardcore emotions like sadness, joy, I mean, there really are built in the ego of your own self. Mm-hmm. You know, your anger is based around yourself, your own response to a given situation. And boy, what a way to be free if you could, when you can, not have that reaction or that emotional response, because it doesn't do anything. At the end of the day, it doesn't make anything better. So then we're very grateful for that sutta.
Yeah, it is. It's a great sutta. You're welcome. Like I said, one of my favorites, but there's about 84,000 favorites. It all points back to not taking anything personal, because when you really understand that the self is always in a process of becoming, there's nothing that can be taken personal. How could it? Nothing's happening to me. It's just happening in the world. Even things that are in the past would be excitable. It's only because I was taking them personally. Even anger. You know, the guy cuts you off. If you don't take it personal, how could you get angry? It's a good example. I mean, when I was younger, my poor ex-wife, she used to drive with me while we were married. She used to always be amazed at how I could be. I spent a lot of time driving with my head out the window and usually a hand with one finger up. And it was painful for the people around me, the other drivers, but it was really painful for me and my ex-wife. But what an awful way to live your life. And it was because other people were on the road. And sometimes they drove in a way that I thought they should drive differently. And maybe they should have been driving differently. It wasn't for me to say. Do you see what I was taking everything in life so personally? I like to say that I don't like to say it, but it's true. I was born angry. I was an angry little kid. And I couldn't even understand it. I remember being, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and just being terribly dissatisfied with my life. And I had a wonderful family, middle class, everything that a kid could want. Well, everything that a kid could need, not everything I wanted. And that pissed me off too. I had no reason to be so dissatisfied with my life. And so I blamed the world around me, and I also blamed myself. And this got me into a lot of trouble with drugs and alcohol and all kinds of other things that young people do to act out when they feel that way. And it wasn't until I developed the Buddhist teachings that I realized the cause of my unhappiness, my dissatisfaction, wasn't the world around me. And it really wasn't me. It was that I was thinking wrong. And as I started to do that, my head came back into the car. My hand stayed on the steering wheel. And my life improved. And the people in my immediate circle, their lives improved too. Because this angry young man wasn't there anymore. And I didn't need that anger to survive in there. I mean, that was really the big revelation when I finally got enough past it. I didn't say that every shred of anger was gone. But when I got enough past it and realized that I didn't need anger to live in the world. I didn't need it. And my life was better. So thank you for bringing that up. Olivia, good to see you tonight.
Good to see you.
How are you? How's your practice?
I definitely am calmer, I would say. The not taking things personal is something that will help me. I'm gonna keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll still experience feelings of anger,
Yep.
but I think I'm acting less on them.
It's outstanding,
Less,
isn't it?
Yeah, less reactive.
That whole idea of not taking anything personal develops over time, and it's simply a consequence of developing the Eightfold Path.
Yeah.
You go from wrong views rooted in ignorance of how things really are, meaning that I need to continually establish myself in all things, to realizing you can't. And so you naturally stop taking things personal. But it's a good idea to recognize when you're taking something personal, anything. Say to yourself, this is not me, this is not mine, this is not who I am. And almost always, a calm and peaceful mind will start developing. And you've only been coming a short while, and you're already recognizing the benefits of that. So keep coming. You know.
Thank you.
I'm glad you're here tonight. Emily, good to see you.
Good to see you too. Yeah.
I see you.
I'm happy to be here. Let's see. I haven't gotten to practice the meditation on my own. I have a 3-month-old at home,
Wow.
and she's my alarm. So like, I wake up, change her diaper, and go on with the day. But I feel like I really need to be here because, like you said, we miss out on life.
Yeah.
We don't live life on life's terms. We just,
Yes.
try to remain to how we want it to be, and we want more and more and more. And so I feel like with her, I'm out. I'm out somewhere else. My head is somewhere else, and I'm missing out on all the little, milestones and
That's
little
right.
joys with her. If I keep doing that, and I was also born an angry little kid. So I've always tried to get out of my house and go from one thing to the next, to keep my happiness.
Yeah.
Because that's where I found most happiness, doing things, keeping my mind, out of my mind.
Yeah, another way of saying that is keeping
Yeah.
distracted.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So with her, I have a lot more limitations now. She's my first, so it's a whole nother world for me. So just living in that moment with her, and not just waiting till, okay, she's asleep now, I can get stuff done now, but I'm trying to do at least 7 minutes of the meditation and the breathing. Maybe not as soon as I wake up, but at some point I just have to drill it into my head so I can keep practicing, so this is what I do here is all I've done, so the first class and then this one, so.
Well, I'm so glad you joined it. It sounds, I know Olivia has young children too. It's great that you can get here.
Yeah.
And then, when the baby falls asleep for 6 minutes, meditate for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And really just do the best you can.
Yeah.
Don't judge yourself or even the situation harshly.
Right.
Engage in that right effort. And when you can get a couple of minutes in, you don't have to meditate for 20 minutes or 30 minutes or even 7 minutes.
Yeah.
A couple of minutes, a few times a day, and pretty soon you'll have a well-established practice. And if you can keep joining us here, you see the benefits of it. But that's just wonderful. You'll be you'll be able to be present for that little baby as they grow. So,
Right. Yeah.
and I mean, that again, that's the reason why we do this, so we can be present in our life as our life occurs in a meaningful way. It's not about getting somewhere in the future and having a better life. It's having a great life right now. So
Yeah.
I'm glad you're here.
Me too. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. Good to see you tonight.
Good to be here. Thank you, John. What came up for me as you were talking was I was having a conversation with somebody earlier today, and she was sharing her drama with me. And as I was listening, because I had drama earlier, and all of a sudden the little light bulb went on, and my observation of her was in two situations, and I said, gee, it's really interesting, when you were focused on someone else's needs, you followed your intuition, said what you needed to say, didn't have any drama, everything went really smoothly. It was when you made it about yourself, and of course, I'm in a mirror when I'm talking, because usually if I spot something, I have it. So it was just that observation was, wow, talk about right speech, right action, the whole series of rights, the Eightfold Path, is really, when it's not about me, my life really is amazing.
Isn't it?
When I'm creating, and I heard you say it too before, and I really relate to that, is the story. Whatever story I wanted to feed. Today I was just feeding the story that I wasn't getting far enough, fast enough, good enough. And then I was reminded that I needed to be compassionate toward myself.
Yeah.
So just perfect timing for this to be a reminder. I'm so glad to be back in this, in the class and in the Sangha and with you. I was at the retreat because it's very cool. But it's just really good to be here. Meditating as a group is really powerful.
Yeah.
And then just listening to everybody. It's really fun to listen to people who have just kind of started with this too, because I'm sitting here thinking, oh my God, you're going to be so thrilled that you're going to start to show up so much more in your life. And that's exciting to listen to it from the kind of the novice end, and then to have experience. I don't know, it's just, I'm really happy to be here. I'm really happy you're all here sharing, so thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm so glad you're back, and I'm so glad all of you joined tonight. Yeah, that's it. The only announcement is our Dhammadinna is November 21st, Tuesday of Thanksgiving week at Love and Oven. Begins at 6, ends around 8:30 or so. 9 o'clock. There's info on the website, but it's just a great, community event, community dinner. Doesn't cost anything. Love and Oven will usually make a turkey and kind of the sides, and we bring those that can, you bring a dish to share with each other, and if you can, a practical gift. There's info on the website and even a list of practical gifts. So I hope you can all join us, and your kids everybody's welcome. So we are taking a donation for that to give some money to Love and Oven to pay for the staff, and there's a donation basket out there for that too. But if you don't make a donation, you can still come. The most important thing is to be there. Okay, we'll finish with metta like we always do. So find your relaxed meditative posture, and gently close your eyes and gently close your mouths. And take a moment to become aware of the sensation of breathing in your body, and let that mindfulness of your breath cease any distracting thoughts to the past or to the future, or that may have arisen from our talk tonight. Excuse me. The Buddha's words on metta from the Karaniya Metta Sutta. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened with duties and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud or demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove. Wishing, in gladness and in safety, may all beings be at ease. Whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short, or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born. May all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another. Even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings. Radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will. Whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, free from drowsiness, one should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding. By not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, is not born again into this world. Thank you all for a wonderful class tonight. Peace. So Thursday night we can leave the cushions right where they are.
Sweet.
And I hope to see you all soon. And I think Emily and Olivia, you both know that there's guided meditations of this that you can download and listen to on the website.
Yes.
Okay, good.